It's only recently that we've realized that physical educators and tennis and squash and racquetball professionals have been going about it the wrong way, teaching racket sports, especially teaching racket sports to beginners. So what we're going to look at is a couple of examples of why you need a progressive approach to teaching the different racket sports. I'll give you a couple of clear examples why we need this progressive approach. Let's start by looking at tennis. The tennis racket is fairly heavy, it's fairly long, the tennis ball is quite compressed and bouncy. So when a beginner starts to play tennis with full-sized equipment, the ball is moving way too fast for them to use good technique. Let's look at a racquetball example. Here's your typical American racquetball made by Echelon. Way too bouncy, way too fast for a beginning player to have the time to focus on their technique and to play good strategy and tactics. A squash example using a typical yellow dot ball. First of all, the ball doesn't bounce. The ball only warms up and bounces after you hit it hard, but you need a lot of coordination to do that. And until it warms up, you have to hit it very hard. And then once it is warm, it moves very fast. Again, totally unsuitable for a beginner. So, what are we going to do? How are we going to change things? Well, luckily, about 30 years ago in Canada, when I started teaching, I was lucky enough to run into Peter Burwash, who was a top Canadian tennis pro, and he's since opened Peter Burwash International and resorts and hotels around the world, very influential in the tennis teaching world. And he came up with this idea of mini tennis, moving the players together inside the service box and just short little tennis. About 10 years after that, Dennis Vandermeer and Tennis Canada again came up with this idea of using slightly smaller rackets, slower balls. And in the last 2 or 3 years, in the tennis world, in the squash world, not yet in the racquetball world, these programs, these progressive approaches have become formalized. So what we're going to do today is look at we're going to take some of these concepts of a progressive approach to learning racket sports. We're going to simplify them down to a bare bones core, a couple of principles and a couple of main points. If you're in a situation where you are starting off people in a racket sport, so squash, racquetball, tennis, and the same principles would even apply to badminton and table tennis. So let's have a look at a couple of things that we need to do to work on a progressive approach. Okay, we have 3 variables that we can play with. We have the type of ball and the easiness of the ball. Here is an example for tennis. This is a regular tennis ball, quite hard. This is a softer teaching tennis ball. Here's a smaller foam ball, and here's a large foam ball. What makes a ball easy or difficult is its hang time in the air. Time is important because it allows the learner time to get in position to play the shot and to think about their technique. So the easiness of the ball is the most important factor in a progressive approach. Okay. The next factor is distance. Distance from the target, distance between the 2 players who are rallying. Basically, the closer the distance, the easier it is to react. So if I have a large foam ball and I'm very close to a wall and I'm taking a very small swing, things are quite easy versus taking a regular ball at a very large distance with a bigger swing, leaving me less time to react. So we have the easiness of the ball, we have distance, and then finally we have the size of the hitting surface, the size of the racket, and how close the hitting surface is to your hand. The closer the hitting surface is to your hand, the easier it is. So for example, tennis, the contact point is quite far from the hand. And with a regular ball, that's quite challenging. In squash, the head of the racket is very small, the ball is very small, and that's quite challenging. In racquetball, a racquetball is about the size of a tennis ball. Racquetball racket would be the easiest racket to play with because you have a very large hitting surface very close to the hand with a decent sized ball. Finally, the length of the swing is also involved in a progressive approach. Obviously, the smaller swings would be easier to time than the bigger swings. So those are the three main factors with the swing size going along, co-varying with these other factors. Those are the factors that we can manipulate to have a progressive approach to teaching racket sports. Let's have a look at a quick couple of examples. In the old days, the way we'd start a beginner off in tennis is we'd give them a full-size racket with a regular ball, and we'd just hit the ball to them or toss the ball to them a lot more slowly. But this is actually quite a difficult task. Nowadays, what we would do is we would take a junior tennis racket, which would look a lot like this, and would use a big foam ball, which moves very slowly, and we'd make the distance very short, and the swing very short, and we'd start the person off with this type of a rally here. In racquetball, for example, it isn't done in racquetball, but what we would recommend for racquetball, here's a normal American ball, which works very, very fast. Over in the United Kingdom, they manufacture a similar sized ball called a British racquetball, but it's a lot slower. So the way we'd start someone off in racquetball, again, a racquetball racket is ideal for a beginner for any racket sport. So we'd take this slow bouncing British racquetball, and with a small swing, you can see that the ball is quite easy to control versus the quicker moving racquetball. In squash, a very similar approach. In the old days, we would take a regular racket and a regular competition ball, very difficult to play with because the ball doesn't bounce. So here we have, for example, a mini squash racket, which could be used with a starting foam ball. Shorten the distance, shorten the swing. And the great thing about squash is they have a systematic way of varying the ball. So here, for example, is a big blue ball, which is a little bit more bouncy. And it can be used with the smaller racket. It still is sort of problematic though. And so in some of the sports, they already have fairly well instituted progressive programs. So tennis, you can find one, the International Tennis Federation, the USTA has one, Tennis Canada has one. In England, they have a mini squash program. So there are some canned programs already out there. Disappointingly, there isn't anything for racquetball, and I think it's definitely needed. I've done a lot of teaching of beginners in racquetball, and that regular ball just ricochets way too wildly and fast for beginners to play it. So we need to import that British racquetball over here.